Live I Wonder Doctor.
I'm Dr. David Rosensweet.
And I'm Joshua Rosensweet. And today we're going to talk about when times are tough, when issues arise, how do you handle them in those relationships you care the most about?
And even when they're not rough, are you being in a relationship in a day-to-day way that builds trust, builds friendship, builds love, builds fun?
Why we chose this one was because you started to tell a story to me of one of your patients and what happened, and I found it touching and poignant and universal. It's one of those, I was listening going, man, for the grace of God go I, and I can fall into this one.
It was Tom who came to me, and I'm going to use different names for he and his wife.
Yeah.
He came to me, and he's approaching 50. Or he could be in his early 50s, I think, actually. And he was very sad, and he and his wife had just separated. And he was very upset about it, and he chose that time to zero in to see if he could see what the heck happened to what was the love of his life. And they had been together for a long time. And so I started asking him to tell me, well, what did he see and what was going on? He said, well, it all started to really become apparent when Samantha got ill. And it started off, her illness was subtle, and it would cause this or that kind of inconvenience in our lives. We made plans with the family and we couldn't follow them through. We made plans for a trip, we couldn't do that. She wasn't quite feeling well enough. And then I'd get a little irritated, and after a while I started to see there's some substance to this, and I started to do what I usually do, which is putting my shoulder to the wheel here. And Tom was starting to choke up a little bit. And he said that we started getting concerned. We started going to doctors. See if what was this fatigue about? What were these blood pressure issues about? What were these waking up in the middle of the night issues about? And what was the chest pain about? And the first cardiologist hooked her up to a lot of machines. I was there. And Tom was saying, you know, doctor after doctor after doctor, no matter what specialist we saw, was not coming up with answers, was not coming up with diagnoses. He even the cardiologist even, what do they call that? Dispensed? No. Told Samantha that he didn't want her as a patient anymore because he couldn't find anything after a couple of years and a lot of tests, and he really thought that it was in her head.
Yeah.
And I woke up in the middle of the night with her many times, he would say, and something was going on there. I don't know what it was. And I would get more irritable, and yet Tom still had his intention to really assist the process and go anywhere and do anything, and they did. They started traveling off to different specialist doctors, functional medicine doctors. Things got turned up, things were addressed, nothing worked. And Tom told me that he started thinking that Samantha might have something going on in her mind as well.
I think people with general kind intentions get really challenged in moments like this because there's nothing to sink his teeth in around anger.
Yeah.
She's not doing anything wrong, and he wants to be a good man and a kind man and take care of his wife, and yet
in his unfolding of the story, actually at one point we decided to ask Samantha to come in and give her version, and Tom had already given me a clue about this, and Tom was saying that he just got more and more irritable, and every time something was mentioned he'd get uptight, and meanwhile Samantha was not doing better, was declining, and he got more angry, And then when we heard Samantha's version on the day that she came in with both of them there, she was very upset. She said that not only was she dealing with a loss of energy and all the rest of the symptoms she was having and not getting any good answers and trying a lot of things and spending a lot of their money and not getting results, here her husband was being angry at her and judging her, and sometimes he would do it silently. And even though she recognized that he was putting everything, all the muscle he had to do whatever it seemed to be the next step, that his day-to-day attitude was grumpy and irritable and judgmental of her. And then, you know, many of you have gone down a trail like this for maybe different reasons, maybe financial reasons or maybe invisible reasons.
And they're tricky and they're nuanced in generally sweet relationships. Like, when I think of this personally, I go, boy, what I bet you Tom looked like mostly on the outside was he wasn't cussing up a storm or screaming or yelling, and he's probably keeping a happy face as much as he could. And yet, you know your spouse.
Yeah.
And you know the underlying layers. And his rational brain is telling him, well, it's not my wife, and I'm going to stay nice. And he's doing everything he can to put on a good front.
Pretty much how he described it.
Yeah.
But he had this underlying voice going on that he told me about, that he could see his behavior, but he was partially justified it, and he partially got suspicious, and he partially got exhausted. And meanwhile, they separated. And that's when he showed up. And because he started off with talking about his side of it and talking about how she had certain roles and the, you know, there were certain things that she was doing that irritated him, that he didn't like. And there's a moment after hearing a story that I said, Tom, let's pause for a minute. We all know that it's easy to get discontent and hopeless around dealing with a lot of doctors. And we all don't know what was actually going on in Samantha, but that something was going on there. And you could have reasons to be upset, but what I want you to do, and this is what I did with him, is I want you to pause, and I want you to really turn on your microscope, and let's look more closely than ever before of what was actually going on in any given moment. You can choose any scene you want. Some that were more dramatic, some that was less dramatic. Think of one. And when you got one, tell me, he told me what the scene was, where he had just gotten really upset after they had traveled and gone to dinner after a visit to one of the doctors, and he just got critical and throwing his hands up. I said, good. Close your eyes with your imagination, the best as you can. Picture yourself in that restaurant. And try, to the best of your ability, to identify what you were feeling. And we did pause, and I went silent. And it seemed like a long time he went silent. And then I could see him get agitated, and then tears started running down his cheek. And I said, what's going on? He said, well, I'm remembering how uncomfortable I was. And I said, now, good, this is great. Now, with your hindsight here, or your imagination, tell me, with the best as you can, what you were feeling in that moment at that restaurant. And he paused, and then he said, I was really angry. I was really down on Samantha. And I said, good, we're getting there. And when you felt angry and you were really judgmental of Samantha, what were you feeling? And he paused, and this was a longer pause. And he said, I was afraid. I felt hopeless. I felt afraid. I felt sad. And then, as the word sad is coming out of his mouth, and I can see it right now, he burst into tears. And it was one of those things that, you know, when someone's doing that in your presence, you just stay quiet and give them all the room and kindness you possibly can to let them have their full experience. And he did have a full experience. And it was those deep, I don't know if you've ever touched that in your life, where there are deep, wrenching sobs. that the grief and the sadness takes over, and you're not thinking, you're not trying. And then occasionally I'd step in and say, and we know you're feeling sadness, is there anything else you feel? Especially when he would calm down a little bit. And he'd go, fear and hopelessness. And I just spent time being a safe and encouraging person in his life to keep him there. He had arrived at a very core, what I would call deep and more fundamental emotional experience of sadness, fear, and hopelessness. Those were his three big ones. And I just kept saying, keep feeling it, and keep feeling it. And he'd go to that fear, and the fear was the hardest one for him.
So he'd try and muscle up and be compassionate. But underneath,
this is what was going on.
All this was going on, so it didn't matter how hard he muscled up.
Yeah.
First of all, his wife could see through it anyhow.
Yeah.
Something was going on in him.
Right.
As much as he's trying to hold my hand and pay the bills and carry me or whatever he's doing. But if he's not getting at this, there's no amount of strength and attempt to be compassionate.
To fake it.
Right, to fake it. We can't pull it off. We're hurting.
And you're naming a very key word, but I don't want to go there quite yet. The main thing that was going on...
Which word?
Compassionate. You're leaping ahead into what was he not doing, and that what does work in the human. But let's creep up on that one a little more, because I want to keep you where he was.
Yeah.
And then as the sobs started to lighten up, and this is 10, 20 minutes, 30 minutes of just heaving, uncontrollable sobs, alternating with these times of fear. And then he went through a stage of feeling absolutely humiliated. He saw the behavior that you just described pretty accurately that he was doing to his wife all the time, day after day, a little more, a little less, even though his intention to assist and succeed was so strong. What was actually appearing at their surface where they met was this, and he just felt the abuse, and he started using the word abuse, and he saw it as abuse, whereas back in the time that it was actually going on, he saw it as understandable. There's things to feel hopeless about, there's things to be irritated about.
Even at the beginning of your appointment, he was still languaging it as...
Yes, he had a little bit of humility because he had shown up on his own accord.
Yeah, right.
He knew something wasn't quite right, but he was all, yes, in the beginning he was talking about her responsibility, his responsibility.
Yeah.
And then by that time, he was so deep in it, and he was, and you know, I don't know if any of you out there have had an experience when you hit a certain layer of truth, and I'm not talking about 1 and 1 is 2 truth. I'm talking about things that are so strong in your soul and about life and about love and not love and stuff. And he had hit the bottom. He fully saw with his consciousness, and most important of all, he became one with and felt the accompanying feelings. And it made him so humble and so apologetic. And the next thing he did, after this was the second session or something like that, is I didn't have any suggestions for him. I wanted him to just go to him and then see what happened, rather than see what his natural tendencies were. And he said he did round 1 of apologizing to Samantha. And in apologizing to her in person, he once again went to that deep grief and that deep remorse. And what remorse is, you've done something that was harmful to somebody and you can't take it back. You can't reel it in. You did it and it's there. Doesn't mean you can't heal together over time. But you can't just say, well, now let's annihilate that and we'll start from scratch. No. As you mentioned to me before, we have these bank accounts, and you do 1 injury, and it takes about, and that's a big withdrawal, and it takes about 5 deposits, 5 decent things, or 8. Psychologists have figured this out. Psychologists, I'd like to site is Rick Hanson, Hanson, PhD. For those of you who are interested in your mind and emotions, I have had the privilege to be blessed, and we all are, by these teachers who've gotten their works online.
We also want to mention Tara Brach. She's actually, one of our titles was straight from her.
Exactly. The title of this particular segment was Tara, actually, Tara Brach, Tarabrach. She's a PhD psychologist as well. These are two sterling people, and there are many more, but they're accessible online for no charge. Oh my God, what we're so blessed with. And but at any rate, yes, you do injury, and it's going to take you, I think Rick mentioned that it might be 8 times of being beneficial to make up, even begin to reverse the neuronal learning that takes place when harshness is done.
The other thing is, you mentioned his apology. I find that there are levels of apology.
Yeah.
There are apologies where my teeth are gritted and I only sort of mean it.
Because you want to get it over with.
You want to get it over with, or
I'm very sorry. Now let's move on.
I'm very sorry. Now you be sorry too.
And let's move on here.
And then there's a spectrum, and it keeps on going and going and going and going. And then if I'm as close to those core moments of humbleness, and down in my deepest self-discovery moments.
That's right.
If I can find an apology in there, those who know me feel that, right? Talk about a deposit. The deeper more truthful and honest that apology is, and willingness to admit where I am in that moment when I'm given it.
That's receivable.
That's receivable. That's a huge, huge deposit.
And what's the key word there? Truth.
Yeah.
The truth will set you free. I don't know if I've had a guideline that I've come to learn that if I can just start telling myself the truth and get down to the truth, oh my God, the relief, and very often the humility and humbleness and remorse that you can feel when you see what you've been doing to yourself and to others.
The grace of God go I moment for me was really early on in the story. There's lots of them, but that point where life is happening in real time.
Right.
And the outcome with your spouse is unknown, and the money is really draining your bank account, and the future fear of more money leaving. It's all really happening. And I am capable of getting caught up in those details, not dealing with what's going on underneath it, finding language to deal with it. It's her, or it's the bills, or maybe the doctors are wrong, or and the pain is so acute. The desire to find a solution is acute too, but it doesn't mean I'm going deep enough to do it. I can just start running and running and running these stories and stories and stories.
I love how you said that life is happening in real time. And we can have all the retrospective view of this in the world we want, but these things are not clear in the moment. And I want to go to the next thing that happened is on the third session with Tom, he had already had this major apology, and both he and Samantha were in tears. He came back for the next session, and that opened the door to him seeing the details, seeing and feeling the abuse that he was doing, and that he had done over years of putting work over relationship, of being worried and holding other things as priority, rather than the best thing that had ever happened to him was their relationship, their marriage. And how you can dismantle being in love molecule by molecule by molecule. Lack of kindness, lack of remembering an anniversary, saying a harsh word, doing a judgment, you both go silent, and the distance starts. So he saw it, he took it way back to their beginning, and he started feeling in that third session, and he saw the trail of tears that he himself had done unconsciously, self-centeredly, And that was his worst moment, so to speak. By the time we were about an hour into that session, he was feeling so uncomfortable and so hopeless about himself and so hopeless about what he had done. And then he went and brought that, I learned later, to Samantha, and she tracked it with him, because you show up, for example, for your spouse, if you're real, you got a real good chance that they're going to show up for you and be there.
It's such an act of bravery.
Yeah.
Like, I can feel that moment when you're hovering around the edges of the things you've done wrong in your past. It only hurts a little bit.
Yeah.
But when you have one of those moments where you can't erase the things you've done.
That's right.
You can't undo them. They are
know that.
done. And how do you first just actually even like uncork that bottle, because
you're afraid of it. Couples are afraid to go into that.
Too big.
Couples are afraid to go into those nooks and crannies, I find.
Yeah.
Or anybody, in a business relationship, or, wherever things matter, friendships. People are afraid to go into those. Well, I forgot to tell you, or I've been meaning to tell you about what I think about this and that about you. So they build up over time.
Yeah.
Well, they did the PhD course and going in there. And he said the second time was even harder, because he was more feeling the full length of their whole relationship and how he had been given the love of his life and the best thing he'd ever received, and dismantled it grouch by grouch, and that's part of how she got ill. And he saw that he was a major reason why she got ill. And she had her own reasons in there, but they weren't the biggest thing. It was really Tom. And of course we always do these dances together, and our weaknesses play off one another, but Tom really, he wasn't thinking anymore about Samantha. He was thinking more about the injury he had done after decades. And when they had that talk, something else let go in her. Because, it can be mysterious for the partner as well. They can just feel diminished day after day, or neglected day after day, or unimportant day after day, or unloved day after day. And they don't really know in real time, like you said, why. There is molecule by molecule, so it's happening very slowly, and you don't know.
And responsible parties want to own their own part. So Samantha could be,
Exactly.
Okay, maybe he was a jerk because I was being a jerk.
Exactly.
And it gets
exactly.
muddy.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that dynamic was also going on in their relationship. And I think it goes on, like you would suggest there, in many relationships. Well, by the end of that third time, and we'd also seen Samantha in there, but what they did was in private. I was mainly working with Tom.
Yeah.
And just got a little more information the day Samantha came in. But all of a sudden, as we're examining, well, what would have been different? Well, true attention and compassion. Compassion is you can see the duress that someone important to you is in, and your heart flutters, and you care about them, and you feel the kindness, and you're there for them to be soothing and to love them, knowing at the same time they're hurting. And then Tara Brock has elucidated this one. So much of what I can relate and learned about this came from her. And do you remember the exact quote she entitled her recent weekly broadcast on? If I were, what is it like to be you? That's an orientation. What is it like to be you? I mean, one could make a case that when someone important in your life is hurting, you could go so far as to say, oh, what is it like to be you? That would be a gateway to understanding and possibly being compassionate. And what Tara explains so beautifully, tarabrock.com, T-A-R-A-B-R-A-C-H, an infinite resource on life and human issues. what actually happened as Samantha was feeling the effects of the gradual diminution of their sparkling love and feeling concerned about it and not looking more concerned and feeling more fearful. And then, of course, Tom looks at her and says, where's my beautiful wife? Maybe this isn't my soulmate. You go, all kinds of crap can go on in there, but you're causing it in each other. And then she crosses the line and she starts getting ill, and he starts getting irritated, and now she's having to contend with her irritation. What happened to Tom? Well, we're all, to one extent or another, we feel each other's feelings, and we're affected by each other's feelings. And what Tara elucidated so clearly, in fact, some people call it empathy, where you come into a room and you feel what someone else is feeling. And some people hide behind empathy. So what if you feel some other one's feelings? It's what you do about it. And what Tom had trouble with is, as they started losing their sparkling love to begin with, but it still looked fine, like a good marriage, and then she started to get ill. When she got ill, he got afraid. He got scared. He was losing her. And he got sad, and he felt hopeless. No matter what they did, they couldn't get anything. And so what happened is, what he did in that session with me, which is to get into full feeling experience, consciousness, he's feeling his feelings, he didn't do it at the time. We are adverse as a human race, not everybody. Many people have unearthed this secret and changed the course of their eternal existence. He didn't like the feelings he was feeling, so he started blocking them. And then when you start doing that, you start doing a psychological thing called projecting them. Well, it's the fault of the communists, or it's the fault of the government, or it's the fault of my wife. And instead of owning his own fear, his own sadness, he suppressed it, and it turned into anxiety and irritability. And then you project out, and you go, oh, it must be them. Couldn't be me. And so what he did so well in that session, after many decades after beginning this process, he wasn't doing on a day-to-day basis. And this is what he learned, and this is the experience that he had. That he learned, if he started getting uncomfortable with somebody, especially Samantha, because that's where we feel it. We feel it where it's up close and personal. If you get a snide remark or a grouchy attitude from someone in the checkout line at your local department or grocery store, it's no big deal. It usually rubs off, although we all feel those things. Yeah. But when it's happening up close and personal in your own family or in your own dear friends or work relationships, we do feel it. What he did is he blocked it. I'm repeating myself. He blocked what he felt, and then you get confused, and then you start blaming someone, and then she feels that, and everything gets worse. And you can't get compassionate. The remedy is, when you feel someone else's feelings, okay, they're having their experience. And you could say, well, I was feeling fine until I came into the energy field of my friend who was feeling fear. Then I started feeling fear, and that's not okay. They shouldn't be feeling that fear, and you start blaming them. But if you go, well, isn't that interesting? I was feeling fine. I came in to be with my spouse. She's feeling fear. I'm starting to get irritated. Because that's what he had to do, is slow down the whole process. I've come home. Samantha's had a bad day. I was feeling fine. Now I'm feeling something. I'm feeling irritable. Clue, let me deal with the elephant in my room. What am I feeling? Never mind all my projections and thoughts and evaluations about where Samantha is. What am I feeling? And if Tom had the skill, which he eventually developed, you go, oh my God, I'm feeling afraid. Probably for a lot of reasons. I never healed my own fear to begin with. And my concern for my wife. Okay, step number one. I'm going to do what my fear, the elephant in my room, I don't know exactly what's going on in Samantha, but the elephant in my room is my fear. I'm getting judgmental. Why? I'm angry. Why? Because I can't control the situation. I can't make it be what I want it to be. I feel hopeless. I can't, this world will not do what I want it to do. I'm feeling angry. And that is an example of a human being, and this is what you suggested earlier, taking full responsibility for what's going on in them. And then you do that enough, and the truth will set you free, sets me free. When I get to those kind of truths, I'm at the bottom.
It's, you know, there's the two roads diverge. I see those moments. They happen all over the place in every one of our days, and it's really two different paths with two very different outcomes. And it's a subtle shift, sometimes hard to make.
Yes.
But if I can make it,
yes,
a whole different set of outcomes start to occur.
Exactly.
Right? That moment of courage for me to own that I'm scared or I'm mad or whatever's going on, and to not do that next step, which is to take it out on her or do some trip, be less than real, be less than kind, not even be able to see her. I'd have some stereotype in my mind of who she is and what she's feeling, because I'm not even really looking anymore. But if I can catch it a moment later, it's like rewind the tape, play it again with that one little change, and now the whole evening is different. She feels the love I was capable of giving, the courage I showed in the moment, and her day gets ever so slightly brighter.
Exactly.
And her trust of me is ever so slightly higher, so that she has a little room in her heart to be compassionate to me, and her compassion for me, it gets...
I just love this.
Yeah.
This is how life works or doesn't work. This is how love builds or love dismantles.
Yeah.
And it's taking place in these microscopic moments. And what's the remedy? I don't want to make it sound too complex, because I've given a lot of words to this process.
Yeah.
But what does it do? The Tom eventually learned to, when he got upset, to not look outwards to the cause of his upset, to focus in on his upset. And it moves from this ambiguous term, unclear term called upset, into, it breaks down to real emotions. Fear, sadness, anger, shame, guilt, some core emotional discomfort. And all you have to do is do what that needs. That needs something. If you're feeling afraid, if you're feeling angry, you need something. And what your being needs, what your heart and soul needs, is unconditional love. Oh, there's a nice ambiguous term. No, I'm going to get very specific about it. There's a specific act of unconditional love that you need in that moment. You need something called acceptance. So you develop the muscle to recognize what's going on inside of yourself, really on the emotional level, and Tom made it there. He knew he was afraid, and he knew he was angry. And feel it, and allow it to be the actual energy that it is. That's called acceptance. You're letting yourself be exactly who you are in the moment, rather than dodging it, blaming somebody else, running away from it, suppressing it. The truth will set you free. You connect it up with the truth, especially emotionally. And you're sitting there, and I do this a lot, as you know. You're breathing, you're feeling, you're aware that you're talking to somebody, but you're feeling what's going on in your own heart and your own emotions, and you're feeling afraid, and you're feeling sad. And I guarantee you that if you do that, most all the time, unless you've got some deep stuff, and that's okay too, you're going to have a surprise. That if it's unconditional love, if you have acceptance for it, if you let it be the energy that it is, and you allow it to be the energy, and don't put any timelines on it, and don't do some funky healing technique that really is saying, I'm going to get rid of you. I'm going to express and release you, get rid of you. It's just acceptance. You'll melt.
One of the degrees I have is in screenwriting. And one of the concepts they taught was what's behind the door is, you know, if you're writing a scary movie, is much scarier before you open the door, right? The build-up, seeing the door, the music plays, that's the scariest moment in a movie frequently. And then the door opens, it's the monster, and we get a little jump scare.
Right.
But the deep, deep scare is the pre-door open scare.
Oh, that's great.
And why I've gone here is I'm feeling that moment of courage where you have acceptance, and it's scarier before you open the door.
Yes.
It is scary to honestly see my most broken parts and admit themselves to myself.
Yeah.
That is scary and doesn't feel good.
Right.
But before I've opened the door, it's actually scarier because I don't know what kind of monsters lurk in there. And maybe they're bigger than I can handle. And
that's very important.
Yeah.
I think a lot of mental illness is it's too intimidating to open the door. And then you get with a therapist who will help you open that door in a safe environment, and they see that, oh, it was just fear.
Yeah.
And you can heal some of the most severe stuff by opening that door. I think that's a wonderful analogy. And then what happened for Tom is, and this is because he told me this blow by blow.
Yeah.
He said the thing that shocked him was when he started owning and feeling and just allowing his own feelings to be what they were, his attention started shifting for two reasons. One, without being totally conscious of it, he was starting to feel relief. He had hit bottom. And he was giving unconditional love. He was giving acceptance to what was actually going on in him, and he was taking full responsibility for what was going on in him, meaning he was seeing it, he was accepting it, he was feeling it, he was letting it be what it is. His heart started to open up to Samantha. And he started seeing that it was still hard for her. And he just said, I understood for the first time what compassion was, because I felt it. My heart fluttered with caring for her, love for her, and I became safe to her in that moment. So the medicine that could have served them as she started getting ill, never mind what caused her to get ill, was if he could have shown up with compassion, she would have felt safer, less stress. That's what you can bring to a distressed human being, is you can bring compassion. But in order to get there, it's got to be real. You can't fake it. Everybody feels everything. And so in order to get there, you have to do that courageous act, that moment of blindness where you go, is there a door here? And you go, I'll open this door.
I want to open the door.
These are metaphors.
Okay.
But the actual action is you just ask yourself what's really going on.
Yeah.
And as you build that muscle, you'll get to know, look at that. I thought it was her, but it was my fear. And you just breathe and feel the fear. You won't need to go any deeper because it doesn't go deeper than that. You breathe and feel the fear, you'll start to feel it, especially if you don't have any agenda that it's got to feel relief. And then the shock for Tom, and this is what Tara Brach explains in such beautiful detail and actually guides people in a meditation around this, is he started feeling compassion for Samantha, the very thing that would have made a world of difference in her whole process together. And they touched on the love again, and that was the third of them, is they touched on their original love again. And so this is a big deal. I mean, you know, we're going to look back and we're going to think, gee, I did great work. My work was so great. Yeah. And when, you know, like we were talking about on our deathbed,
Yeah.
we're not going to be thinking about that. We're going to think about the love we made and the, you know, the Beatles song, "The Love You." And so these were highly, deeply touching. And one of the reasons I want to tell the story is it's not that complicated. But if you don't do this great work, your life just complexifies and complicates and breaks down, and you can lose love. And you can lose businesses. Businesses break up over these interpersonal things. And then, just to take it one step further, now in the course of my lifetime, I personally have never witnessed neighbor against neighbor like I have, and divisiveness that's taking place. And one side of the political spectrum is calling the other side evil and vice versa. And we all know how challenging this has become in the United States and threatens our whole planet. And what's the remedy? Well, we could say that nations could be compassionate and really reach out and try and understand the hurt that's going on and the primitiveness that's going on. Or governments could be compassionate and realize, for example, that the economic disparity, people are hurting, and really take on the project of, because you feel compassion for people, really take on the project of healing the economic disparity and remedying the hurts. So, you know, it really all starts up close and personal, but we'll never be able to bring it to the body politic unless we can bring it to ourselves, and that's what Tom did. He brought it to himself, and then he was capable of feeling compassion for his wife, and that was his shock. That was the thing that stood out most about the whole story that we walked along in, was he found the compassion that he knew he needed from the beginning, but he didn't have it. He had irritation.
And what you've alluded to or hinted at is that there is a certain amount of real life happy ending in this. You did it.
I know.
His bravery to show up with you, and then his bravery to really go here, and then his bravery to admit it to his wife and go deep.
And do it again.
They you know, outcomes unknown, because these things
That's
are,
right.
you know, you do a hurt, it takes a long time to undo hurt, but they gave themselves a real shot at this.
Yeah.
He did.
And they
She did
came
too,
out,
but-
it looks like, I don't know the rest of the story,
Yeah.
because this is a very fresh and recent one,
Yeah.
but it looks like they've grown. And that's one of the most rewarding sports I know on this planet, is
even if
personal
the outcome,
growth.
even if the outcome is
Yeah.
that they don't make it,
Yeah.
what's the difference for
The
Tom?
caring and the love is there.
How does Tom leave this, if that's the truth? He leaves it a man brave enough to really do his part
Yeah.
and work hard at it, and that's a still, and to leave on the best terms possible,
Exactly.
right? That's an entirely different kind of breakup than the
It
other
is.
kind of
It
breakup,
is,
if that's
yeah.
what ends up happening.
That's what ends up happening. So, life. How does this relate to medicine? Well, you can imagine that it relates to health. I can explain it in another I Wonder Doctor session, but I don't really think I have to.
Yeah.
Well, let me just say one thing. When someone comes in to me ill, and often they arrive at my doctor's office, there's been a lot of water under the bridge. They just don't casually call the doctor when I go, hey, I think I got a sniffle. No way. They show up to the doctor and are willing to go on that process when a lot has happened. And what I know automatically is something that matters to them is not going well, and that's the cause of their illness. And so this is just not theoretical medicine. I know as a physician that we've got to walk all the way down to what's not going well for you.
If you want to turn that story internally, what Tom was doing to his own biochemistry,
Yes.
hormones, blood pressure,
Oh, yeah.
pulse, all of that.
And the effect he had on Samantha,
Yeah.
because we do affect each other. Don't ever kid yourself that if you have a grouchy day, that's just fine with everybody around you, and you're not going to affect their adrenal glands or their ovaries or their testicles or their guts or their heart. You are. We are very connected, but you know, we could keep unwinding this one.
Yeah. And we definitely have to wrap
Thank you.
this time.
Yes. So, always an honor to be with everybody and to be able to share these. Very important to me, for sure. I learn right along when I go on the journey with the patients. What a gift it is to me.
Yeah. I'm sitting here. We already talked about this today. This is a repeat for me.
Yes, right.
And yet, is it still powerful? Yeah. I mean, I think the most basic life lessons, you get to keep learning them and hearing them
Yeah.
over and over and over again, and they resonate when they do. And I don't know what it's like on that side of the camera, but I can tell you this side. It resonates and it feels real, and it feels like, what matters more in life than this? Anything? This is my basics. We're down to what matters most to
Yes,
me.
exactly.
The good man-o-meter. Anyhow, we'll see you all next week at 1 and 2 Eastern Standard on Thursdays. All righty.